In the bustling heart of Lagos, where the city never truly sleeps, lived a man named Philip. Young, wealthy, and brilliant, Philip was the face behind one of the most successful tech empires in Africa. His name carried weight in business circles, and his ruthless decisions in boardrooms earned him respect and fear in equal measure. But beyond the flashing cameras, luxury cars, and towering glass buildings, Philip's heart was an empty mansion, grand but hollow, echoing with loneliness. He attended gala after gala, surrounded by people who wore smiles as masks, hiding their true intentions. His family name was prestigious, his bank accounts overflowing, yet he felt like a stranger in his own life. Success he had, but joy, that was something his money could never buy. Far from Philip's world, under the dim glow of streetlights, sat Beauty, a young homeless girl with nothing but her spirit, her dreams, and a homemade guitar. The guitar wasn't fancy, its strings were mismatched, and the wood bore scratches from years of use. But when Beauty strummed it, magic danced in the air. Her voice was raw, filled with both sorrow and hope, telling stories of dreams deferred but never forgotten. Beauty was kind-hearted, her laughter like the jingling of tiny bells, even though life had been unkind to her. She had dreams of becoming a big musician, not just a street performer, but someone whose songs would travel beyond the corners of the city, touching hearts across the world. One chilly evening, while the rich dined in golden halls and the poor searched for warmth, Philip found himself wandering the streets, trying to escape another suffocating high society event. His expensive shoes clicked on the pavement until he heard something that made him stop. A melody, soft yet powerful, floating through the night air. Drawn by the sound, he followed it like a traveler chasing the call of a distant drum. And there she was, Beauty, sitting on an old mat, her fingers strumming the worn-out guitar, her voice weaving magic into the night. Her song wasn't perfect, but it was real, filled with emotions money couldn't buy. For the first time in years, something touched his heart. Not a business deal, not a luxury car, but a song. When she finished, Philip, still lost in the melody, reached into his wallet and dropped a thick bundle of naira into her guitar case without saying a word. Then he walked away, his heart thudding like a drum in his chest. But he couldn't forget her. That night, her voice haunted him. The next evening, dressed in casual clothes to blend in, he returned to the same spot. This time, he didn't just drop money and leave. He stayed, hiding in the shadows, pretending to enjoy the city nightlife. But it wasn't the city he was interested in. It was her. Eventually, he gathered the courage to speak. "Your music. It's different," he said, standing awkwardly with his hands in his pockets. Beauty looked up, her bright eyes meeting his. She smiled, a smile that could light up the darkest alley. "Different good or different bad?" she asked playfully. Philip chuckled, something he hadn't done genuinely in a long time. Different. Beautiful. And just like that, their story began. They talked, first about music, then about life. Beauty spoke of her dream to become a big musician, to sing on stages where thousands would cheer her name, not just toss coins at her feet. She shared how she wrote songs from the pain and beauty of her struggles, how every chord was a piece of her heart. Philip listened like a thirsty man drinking from a well. He found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. The loneliness behind his success, the emptiness wealth couldn't fill. With Beauty, he wasn't the billionaire, he was just a man. Days turned into weeks. Their meetings became the highlight of Philip's life. They met in quiet parks, old libraries, and hidden corners of the city. Philip learned to see beauty in simple things. A cup of roadside tea, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of children playing in the dust. He was falling in love. Not with her face, though she was beautiful, but with her spirit, her courage, her heart. But fear was a stubborn shadow. Philip knew what the world would say, a billionaire falling for a homeless girl, scandalous, ridiculous. His family, especially his mother, valued appearances above all else, so he kept beauty a secret. Until one day, everything changed. Philip was at an exclusive gala, a room filled with the city's richest and most powerful. In his rush to leave his house, he had forgotten his watch, a family heirloom. Beauty, always thoughtful, decided to surprise him by bringing it to the event. She walked into the grand hall, her simple dress standing out amidst glittering gowns and sharp suits. The room fell silent. Eyes turned. Whispers started. Some laughed, others stared in disbelief. Philip's peers mocked him openly. His mother's face turned cold as ice, her disapproval sharp and cutting. The humiliation hit Beauty like a slap. She felt like a misplaced note in a perfect melody, like a stain on an expensive cloth. Heartbroken, Beauty left. No note, no goodbye, just gone. Philip was devastated. The life he had carefully built crumbled around him. His mansion felt emptier, his wealth meaningless. He realized something powerful. He could live without luxury, but he couldn't live without beauty. Driven by love, Philip searched the city. He walked the streets where they had laughed, checked the corners where they had shared secrets, and even sat under the tree where she once sang him his favorite song. Days turned into weeks, but he didn't give up. Finally, on a rainy afternoon, he found her sitting under an old bridge, her guitar beside her, her face hidden behind tears and raindrops. Philip rushed to her, dropping to his knees in the mud without caring about his expensive clothes. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I have been looking for you." Beauty looked up, her eyes filled with sadness. "Why? So I can embarrass you again." Philip shook his head, his heart breaking. "You could never embarrass me. I was the fool, hiding you from the world when you're the most beautiful part of it." Tears mixed with the rain as they both cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming power of love. Philip held her hands tightly. "Come home with me, not to hide you, but to show the world that I'm the luckiest man alive because I have you." Beauty hesitated. She was afraid, not of Philip's love, but of the world's judgment. But love is brave. She nodded. When Philip introduced her to his parents, his mother's face twisted with disapproval. She didn't hide her disgust. She said harsh words, her voice dripping with pride and prejudice. But Philip stood tall. He looked his mother in the eyes and said, "You taught me to value wealth. She taught me to value life, and life without her is meaningless." His words were like thunder, shaking the very walls of their mansion. Beauty realized something that day. She wasn't just a street girl with a dream. She was a woman worth loving, worth fighting for. Philip's father came home. He was a tall man with a serious face, the kind of man whose footsteps could make the house quiet. He opened the big door, removed his shoes slowly, and entered the living room, carrying his briefcase. His wife, Madame Grace, was waiting for him. She didn't even let him sit down before she started talking. "Have you seen that girl our son brought home?" she said with an angry face. "I don't like her at all. She's just a poor street girl with nothing to offer. I want Philip to marry the commissioner's daughter. You know her mother is my friend. They come from a good family." She crossed her arms, waiting for her husband to agree with her. But Chief Obinna, Philip's father, was tired. He had spent the whole day working and didn't want to hear complaints. He sighed deeply, walked past his wife and said, "I'm not in the mood for all that now." Madame Grace's mouth opened wide with surprise. She wanted to argue more, but before she could say another word, her husband turned around, waved his hand and said sharply, "You talk too much." Then he walked away to his room, leaving her standing there, angry and confused. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How could her husband not see the problem? In her eyes, Beauty was not good enough for their son. She was just a street girl with a broken guitar and big dreams. Madame Grace felt Beauty didn't belong in their rich, respected family, but Chief Obinna wasn't like his wife. He was a man who didn't waste words. He had seen many things in life, and he knew that love wasn't about money, family names, or status. Sometimes love just happened, and it didn't ask for permission. Meanwhile, outside in the garden, Philip and Beauty sat under a tree. The moonlight made Beauty's face glow softly. She was holding her old guitar, playing a gentle tune. Philip listened quietly, his eyes filled with love. After a while, he said softly, "Don't worry about what my mother thinks. I love you, and that's all that matters." Beauty smiled, but deep inside she felt sad. She wasn't afraid of being poor. She had lived with nothing for years. But she was afraid that Philip's family would never accept her, and she didn't want to be the reason he lost his family's love. The next day, Philip was in his office. The large glass windows gave him a clear view of the busy city below, but his mind wasn't on the bustling streets or the pile of documents on his desk. His thoughts were with Beauty, her laughter echoing in his heart like a sweet melody. The warmth of her smile had a way of chasing away his worries, but today felt different. There was an uneasiness he couldn't shake. Just as he was about to pick up his pen, the office door swung open with a loud bang. Emily stormed in, her face filled with anger. She didn't knock. She didn't care. She marched straight to Philip's desk, her high heels hitting the floor like tiny drums of war. "What am I hearing, Philip?" she snapped, slamming her designer bag on his desk. "Your mother called me, telling me that you're dating some homeless, dirty girl from the streets. Is that true?" Philip slowly looked up, his face darkening with anger. He stood up, his tall figure towering over Emily, his eyes sharp like daggers. "Emily, what are you doing here?" he asked coldly, trying to control the fire building inside him. Emily laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "I'm here to remind you of who you are. You're a billionaire, Philip. You should be with someone like me, not some street girl who sings for coins." Philip's patience snapped like a dry stick. He slammed his hand on the desk, his voice rising like thunder. "Enough, Emily. Don't you ever talk about Beauty like that." Emily stepped back, shocked by his sudden outburst. Philip's chest heaved as he continued, his words sharp and filled with fury. "You think you're better than her because of your money and fake lifestyle. You're nothing but a spoiled, materialistic brat. All you care about is money, shopping, traveling, clubbing. You can't even cook or clean. You're empty inside. I don't want anything to do with you. Now get out." Emily's face turned red with rage and embarrassment. She grabbed her bag, her eyes burning with hate. Just as she reached the door, she spun around, her voice dripping with venom. "For your information, you stupid, spoilt rich boy, I'm 3 months pregnant with your child." The words hit Philip like a punch to the chest. He stood frozen, staring at her, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emily smiled, enjoying the shock on his face. "You heard me. I'm pregnant, and the baby is yours." Philip shook his head quickly, his heart racing. No, that's not possible. That's not my baby." Emily laughed coldly. "Believe what you want, Philip. But I'm keeping the baby. The earlier you accept it, the better for you." With that, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Philip stood there for a moment, his hands trembling. Then he sank into his chair, staring at nothing. His heart felt heavy, filled with anger, confusion, and fear. How can this be?" he whispered to himself. His mind raced back to the past, remembering moments he had buried deep inside. Was Emily telling the truth, or was this another one of her games to trap him? Philip leaned back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. His heart was torn. He loved Beauty deeply, but now this storm from his past threatened to ruin everything. But one thing was clear. No matter what Emily said, his heart belonged to Beauty, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. The next day, Emily was still boiling with anger. Her plan wasn't going as smoothly as she had hoped. Philip had shouted at her, called her names, and refused to accept the pregnancy. But Emily wasn't someone who gave up easily. She knew exactly where to go to make things worse, straight to Philip's mother, Madame Grace. Emily arrived at Madame Grace's mansion, her face full of fake tears. She wore her best sorrowful expression, knowing exactly how to play the game. As soon as Madame Grace saw her, she rushed over, concern written all over her face. "Emily, my dear, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" Madame Grace asked, her voice soft like honey. Emily sniffled dramatically. "It's Philip, Mummy. I'm pregnant with his child, but he has denied it. He shouted at me and told me to get out. He doesn't want me or the baby." Madame Grace's face darkened with rage. "What? Pregnant with my grandchild? And he denied it?" she hissed. "Don't worry, my daughter. Go to Philip's house, pack your things and stay there. You are now his wife, whether he likes it or not." Emily wiped her fake tears and smiled. "Thank you, Mummy. You're the best." Madame Grace patted Emily's shoulder, her face filled with pride. "Leave everything to me. I will deal with Philip." After Emily left, feeling victorious, Madame Grace picked up her phone and dialed her son's number. She didn't even wait for him to say hello. "Philip," she barked into the phone. Philip, who was still in his office trying to calm his mind, frowned when he heard his mother's voice. "Yes, Mother, what is it now?" he asked, already feeling tired. Madame Grace's voice grew louder, filled with authority. "I want you to chase that dirty guitar girl out of your house immediately. Emily is packing her things and moving into her husband's house. She is your wife now, and that's final." Philip's face turned red with anger. He clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What did you just say, Mother?" he asked. "You heard me. Emily is pregnant with your child. She belongs in your house, not that street girl. I don't want to hear any excuses. Do as I say." Philip was silent for a moment, his mind racing. Then he spoke. "Mother, you've gone too far. You don't control my life. I love Beauty, and nothing you say will change that." Before Madame Grace could reply, Philip ended the call, slamming his phone on the desk. His heart was burning with anger, but deep down there was fear too. He knew his mother wouldn't stop. She was like a snake, silent, sneaky, and dangerous. He had to protect Beauty, no matter what. Meanwhile, Emily was on her way to Philip's house, a wicked smile on her face. She was sure she had won. She imagined herself living in the big house, spending Philip's money, and becoming the rich wife she had always dreamed of. Emily arrived at Philip's house, her face twisted with pride and arrogance. She held her designer handbag tightly, walking with the confidence of someone who thought she owned the world. She didn't even bother to knock. She pushed the door open like she owned the place. Inside, Beauty was sitting on the couch, gently strumming her guitar. The sweet melody filled the room, soft and peaceful. But that peace was about to be shattered. Emily stepped into the living room, her eyes filled with hate. She looked Beauty up and down with disgust and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Well, well, well. Look at you," Emily sneered, her voice dripping with poison. "The dirty, poor guitar girl sitting comfortably in my man's house. Don't get too cozy, because I'm here to take over what's mine." Beauty was shocked. She stopped playing her guitar and stood up slowly, her eyes wide with confusion. "Who are you?" Beauty asked, her voice calm but firm. "And what do you mean by your man's house?" Emily rolled her eyes dramatically, crossing her arms. "Oh, don't act like you don't know me. I'm Emily, Philip's real woman. I'm here to take my place because, unlike you, I belong here." Beauty frowned. "But Philip told me you both broke up months ago." Emily laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "And so? Is that your headache? Break up or not, he's my man. We're getting married soon. His mother told me so. And guess what? I'm pregnant with his child." Beauty felt like the ground had shifted under her feet. Her heart tightened painfully, and she struggled to find her voice. "You're pregnant," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. Emily smiled, enjoying every moment of Beauty's pain. "Yes, I'm pregnant. So pack your things, little girl, and take your dirty guitar with you. This is no place for someone like you. Philip belongs to me." Tears welled up in Beauty's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She wasn't going to break down in front of Emily. Without saying another word, she turned around, walked into the bedroom, and picked up her phone. Her hands shook as she dialed Philip's number. Philip answered immediately. "Hello, my love," he said softly, but Beauty's shaky voice made him sit up straight. "Philip." "She's here," Beauty whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Philip's heart stopped. "Who's there?" "Emily," Beauty replied, her voice filled with pain. "She's in the house. She said she's here to take over because she's pregnant with your child. She insulted me, Philip. Philip didn't let her finish. His voice changed, filled with rage. "What? She's in the house. Listen to me, Beauty. Don't argue with her. I'm coming right now." Philip grabbed his car keys, his face red with anger. He rushed out of his office without saying a word to anyone. His heart pounded in his chest as he drove, his mind racing with fury. Meanwhile, back at the house, Emily continued to walk around like she owned the place. She picked up things, looked at family photos, and even sat on the couch with her legs crossed. Beauty stood by the window, waiting for Philip. Her heart was broken, but there was also a spark of anger burning inside her. She wasn't going to let Emily walk over her without a fight. After what felt like forever, Philip's car screeched to a stop outside. He jumped out and stormed into the house, his face dark with rage. The door flew open. Philip's eyes went straight to Emily. "What are you doing here?" Emily stood up, flipping her hair back. "I'm here where I belong, with my man." Philip marched towards her, his hands clenched into fists. "You're crazy if you think you belong here. I told you it's over between us." Emily smirked. "You think you can dump me and keep me out of your life? I'm pregnant with your child." Philip's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. "I don't care. That child is not mine," he shouted, pointing at her angrily. Emily's face twisted with rage. "Oh, really? Your mother thinks otherwise. She told me to come here because I'm your wife, whether you like it or not." Philip turned to Beauty, who stood quietly, tears shining in her eyes. Seeing her like that broke his heart even more. He walked over to her, cupped her face gently, and said softly, "Don't believe anything she says. I love you, Beauty. Only you." Emily couldn't take it anymore. She screamed, "She's just a poor, dirty guitar girl. She doesn't deserve you." Philip spun around, his face full of fire. "And you don't deserve to be in my life. Get out of my house, Emily." Emily stood there shocked. She thought Philip would take her side. She thought the pregnancy would make him change his mind. But she was wrong. Philip grabbed her bag, threw it outside, and pointed to the door. "Out, now!" Emily had no choice. She picked up her bag, her face red with shame and anger. Before leaving, she turned to Beauty one last time. "This isn't over," she hissed. But Philip didn't care. He slammed the door shut after her. Then he turned to Beauty, pulled her into his arms and whispered, "I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I promise you, no one will ever come between us again." Beauty cried softly in his arms, not from sadness, but from relief. She had fought for love, and love had fought back for her. After Philip threw Emily out of his house, she was furious. Her plan had failed, but she wasn't ready to give up. She knew exactly where to go, the one person who hated Beauty as much as she did. Madame Grace, Philip's mother. Emily arrived at Madame Grace's mansion with tears in her eyes, pretending to be heartbroken. She knocked softly, and when Madame Grace opened the door, Emily fell into her arms, crying loudly, "Mummy, he threw me out. Philip threw me out of his house like I'm nothing. He denied the baby again." Emily sobbed. Madame Grace's face turned dark with anger. She led Emily inside, sat her down, and gave her a glass of water. "Don't cry, my daughter," Madame Grace said, her voice sharp and filled with determination. "You can stay here with me. I will make sure my son accepts the pregnancy. I won't let that dirty guitar girl win." Emily wiped her tears and smiled slyly. "Thank you, Mummy. You're the best." While Emily stayed in Madame Grace's house, pretending to be the perfect daughter-in-law, Madame Grace was busy planning how to force Philip to accept her. The next day, Chief Urbina, Philip's father, noticed the tension in the house. He wasn't a man who liked drama, but he could see that something was wrong. So he picked up his phone and called his son. "Philip, come over this weekend. We need to talk," he said simply. Philip knew this wasn't just a casual visit. His father's voice was serious. When the weekend came, Philip drove to his parents' house. His heart was heavy, but he was ready to face whatever was coming. When he arrived, he found his father sitting in the garden, reading a newspaper. Chief Urbina looked up, nodded, and motioned for Philip to sit. For a moment, there was silence between them, just the sound of birds chirping in the background. Then, Chief Urbina spoke. "I heard what's going on. Your mother told me everything. Now tell me your side." Philip sighed deeply. "Dad, I don't know where to start. Emily is lying. We broke up 4 months ago, but now she claims she's 3 months pregnant. How is that even possible?" Chief Urbina raised an eyebrow, his face thoughtful. He leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin. So you broke up 4 months ago, and she's claiming the pregnancy is 3 months old," he repeated slowly. Philip nodded. "Yes, father. That's why I'm confused. It doesn't make sense." Chief Urbina was quiet for a moment. Then he looked straight into his son's eyes and said firmly, "There's only one way to settle this: DNA test." Philip felt a wave of relief wash over him. His father wasn't jumping to conclusions. He was being logical. "Yes, you're right, Dad. We need to do a DNA test," Philip agreed. Chief Urbina nodded. "Good. If the child is yours, then we will deal with it like men. But if it's not, we'll expose her lies." A few days after Emily moved into Philip's parents' house, her true colors began to show. At first, she acted sweet, pretending to be the perfect daughter-in-law. But soon the mask slipped, and the real Emily, the rude, lazy, and entitled woman, came out in full force. She wouldn't lift a finger to do anything. The maids whispered among themselves about how she would eat and leave plates everywhere, how she would scatter the living room with her clothes, and how she never even made her own bed. The kitchen was the worst. She would leave a mess, spilled food, dirty plates, and used cups everywhere, without bothering to clean up. At first, Madame Grace tried to ignore it, telling herself that Emily was pregnant and needed rest. But as the days passed, she realized that pregnancy wasn't the problem. Emily was just lazy and mannerless. One afternoon, Madame Grace was sitting in the living room when she needed something from the kitchen. She called out, "Emily, my daughter, please get me a glass of water from the fridge." Emily, who was busy scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. With an irritated voice, she snapped, "You old woman, can't you see I am pregnant? Go do it yourself or send one of your maids." The room fell silent. The maids, who had been standing nearby, gasped. They exchanged shocked glances, waiting to see what would happen next. Madame Grace slowly turned to face Emily, her eyes burning with anger. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. Emily rolled her eyes and placed her feet on the couch. "I said, I'm pregnant. I can't be running around like a maid. You have workers, send one of them." Madame Grace's hands tightened into fists. "You ungrateful girl. So this is your true character. Beauty stayed in this house for days, and she never complained about anything. She did whatever I asked without disrespecting me." Emily let out a cold laugh. "Oh please, don't compare me to that dirty guitar girl. I am not Beauty, and I am not a fool you can control. You can't tell me what to do." Madame Grace's patience finally snapped. She shot up from her seat, her eyes blazing with rage. "I will make sure my son does not marry you. You are a spoiled, useless child from a mannerless home. Your parents failed to train you well. That's why you have no respect." Emily's face twisted with fury. Her pride wouldn't allow her to stay quiet. "Look at you, old woman. You think you can insult my parents. What about your own son?" "Me, Emily, I was only managing your ugly son. I was only enjoying his money. I never loved him." The words struck Madame Grace like lightning. She opened her mouth in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. Emily continued, her voice filled with mockery. "And let me tell you the biggest truth. I was never pregnant. I just wanted to punish Philip for breaking up with me." The room went silent. The maids gasped again, covering their mouths in shock. Madame Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. "You... what?" she whispered, shaking with anger. Emily folded her arms and smiled. "You heard me. I lied. I was never pregnant. I just wanted to deal with Philip for leaving me. And now that I'm done, I'm leaving this miserable house." Madame Grace's hands trembled with rage. She pointed at the door. "Get out! Get out of my house this instant, you shameless, wicked girl!" Emily picked up her expensive handbag, flipped her hair back and smirked. "I was already leaving, old woman. Enjoy your dirty guitar, girl." With that, she walked out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Madame Grace collapsed onto the couch, breathing heavily. The truth had finally come out, but the shame of trusting Emily still burned inside her. Madame Grace sat alone in the quiet house, her mind restless. Shame weighed on her like a heavy load she could not shake off. The words Emily had spoken still rang in her ears. She had fought so hard to remove Beauty from her son's life, only to bring in a liar, a fraud, a woman who had no respect for her, her son, or even the child she pretended to carry. She had made a terrible mistake. Without wasting any more time, she picked up her phone and called Philip. The moment he answered, she took a deep breath and spoke. "My son, I have something to tell you." Her voice was weak, a voice that carried regret. Philip's voice came through the phone, sharp and full of suspicion. "What is it, mother?" Madame Grace didn't try to hide the truth. She poured out everything, how Emily had finally confessed, how she had never been pregnant, how she had only wanted to punish him for breaking up with her, and how she had insulted the family and left with no shame or regret. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Philip spoke, and his words were slow, but each one carried weight. "So you see now, mother? You fought against the wrong person. You tried to destroy the happiness I found with Beauty because you believed Emily was the perfect woman. And now, look at what she did to you." Madame Grace closed her eyes, feeling the sting of her son's words. "I was foolish, my son. I let my pride and my status blind me. I should never have treated Beauty the way I did." She sighed deeply before saying the words that felt heavy on her tongue. "Philip, I don't have anything against you marrying Beauty anymore. I accept her." Philip let out a small sigh. He had waited so long to hear those words from his mother, but it wasn't enough. "Mother, if you truly mean what you are saying, then you have to call Beauty yourself. You have insulted and embarrassed that girl enough. If you really regret your actions, you need to tell her that." Madame Grace felt her heart twist. Facing Philip was one thing, but calling Beauty after everything she had done, that was different. But she knew Philip was right. She had to make peace. After ending the call, Madame Grace didn't delay. She took her phone again and called Beauty. The phone rang for a long time before Beauty answered, her voice uncertain. "Good afternoon, Ma." Madame Grace took a shaky breath before speaking. "Beauty, my daughter, I want to see you. Please." There was silence. Then Beauty asked, her voice soft, "Why, Ma?" Madame Grace swallowed her pride. "To make peace." There was a pause before Beauty spoke again. "I will be here, Ma." And with that, the call ended. That evening, Beauty sat quietly, her heart racing. Madame Grace was coming. The woman who had insulted her, called her dirty, said she was unworthy of Philip. What did she really want? When she heard the knock on the door, her stomach tightened. She took a deep breath and went to open it. Madame Grace stood there. Beauty felt fear rise in her chest. She didn't know what to expect. Was this another trick? Had she come to throw more insults? But then Madame Grace spoke. "I came to make peace." Beauty's breath caught in her throat. Madame Grace continued, "Forgive me, my daughter. I was foolish. I judged you because of where you came from, without knowing your heart. I pushed you away because of my pride. But now I see that I was wrong." Silence stretched between them. Then Madame Grace's voice cracked with emotion. "Please forgive me." Beauty felt something inside her soften. The woman who had once looked at her with nothing but disgust now stood before her with humility. She spoke, her voice gentle. "Don't say that, Mummy. I forgave you already." Madame Grace let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Thank you, my daughter. I love you." The words hung in the air, filling the space between them. For the first time, Beauty felt like she truly belonged. 1 year later, Beauty's dream came true. From the streets where she once played for coins, she rose to the biggest stages. Her voice, once heard only by passing strangers, now echoed in stadiums filled with thousands of fans. Beauty became a superstar. Her songs played on every radio station, her face appeared on billboards, and people across the country fell in love with her music. Philip was her biggest supporter. He attended all her shows, stood backstage cheering for her, and watched with pride as the woman he loved conquered the world. She wasn't just a homeless girl with a guitar anymore. She was Beauty, the voice of a generation. 2 years later, after years of love, patience, and growth, Philip and Beauty got married. It was a wedding the city would never forget. Not because of the wealth and glamour, but because of the love that brought them together. Madame Grace, who once fought against Beauty, sat in the front row, wiping tears of joy. She had once called Beauty unworthy, but now she saw her as the daughter she never had. Philip's father, Chief Obinna, smiled with pride. He had always believed in his son's choices, and now he knew Philip had chosen right. As Beauty stood before Philip, dressed in the most beautiful gown, her heart swelled with gratitude. She had been a girl with nothing but a dream, and now she had everything she ever wished for: love, success, and a home filled with happiness. Philip held her hands, looking deep into her eyes, and whispered, "I told you, my love, no one would ever come between us." And with that, their love story came to a perfect, beautiful end. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.